Close your eyes for a moment and feel. Have you ever wondered why, even desiring healing and seeking spiritual awakening, you find yourself trapped in a cycle of pain that seems to have no end? What if your deepest pain wasn't a burden, but the secret foundation of your identity, subtly hindering your true personal development? There's an uncomfortable truth that perennial wisdom whispers, an invitation to deep reflection for authentic spirituality. The ego doesn't want you to heal. It wants you to be right. But what does this enigmatic phrase truly mean for your life and your awakening of consciousness? Prepare for a journey of self-discovery that will reveal how this suffering self has become a refuge, a silent stage where you, perhaps unconsciously, enact the drama of your life. Who would you be without this role? In this video, we will uncover the invisible role of pain in constructing your identity, a crucial step for spiritual awakening. We will explore how the mind forges an emotional identity based on suffering, the subtle addiction of this suffering self as a quest for recognition and control, and the danger of distorted self-compassion that can lead to stagnation in your personal development. Our purpose is not to offer ready-made answers, but to open a sacred space for your consciousness to recognize itself beyond the ego's chains, through deep insights and symbolic provocations. It's an invitation to question the stories you tell yourself about who you are and why you suffer, a fundamental introspective movement for the awakening of consciousness and the transcendence of egoic illusions. Taking the first step on this journey of awakening consciousness, let's delve into how the mind is an active agent in the perpetuation of pain, building an emotional identity based on suffering. This dynamic is an obstacle to personal development. Chronic pain can disintegrate one's sense of self. However, the sense of coherence, SOC, can transform suffering into learning and growth for inner healing and applied spirituality. The mind, through cognitive biases, distorts reality, creating thoughts that become habitual and trap the individual in an incorrect understanding of themselves. This distortion, the narrative of suffering, becomes an egoic coherence, preventing the awakening of consciousness. The self-fulfilling prophecy shows how the belief of being a victim perpetuates suffering. The narrative of suffering, then, becomes the ego's way of maintaining its coherence, even if distorted, generating the "I am a sufferer/victim," which blocks personal development and action. Understanding these mechanisms is crucial for dismantling the identity based on pain. The mind maintains suffering through thought patterns. Distorted perceptions reinforce the narrative of suffering, which the ego adopts as its identity. Healing, therefore, requires dismantling this deeply rooted cognitive structure that the ego sees as fundamental, explaining why intellectual understanding is not enough for profound change and spiritual awakening. If healing demands the dismantling of an identity based on pain, an essential step for spiritual awakening, why does the ego resist so much? The answer lies in secondary gains. Suffering, though painful, can paradoxically offer secondary gains that contribute to its perpetuation, transforming it into an invisible addiction. A secondary gain is the unconscious benefit an individual obtains from their suffering condition, such as attention, exclusive care, or avoidance of undesirable responsibilities. Classic psychoanalysis cases illustrate how illness can be a means of gaining attention and control, showing that suffering can be a bargaining chip, hindering personal development and autonomy. This dynamic manifests in the stance of victimization. Victimhood is the tendency to see oneself as a victim, shifting responsibilities and seeking attention through constant complaints. This egocentric posture prevents the development of a mature personality, leading to stagnation and inaction, as the individual exempts themselves from responsibility for their own story. The need for recognition and control is a powerful unconscious force. Victimhood offers an easy path to obtain them, even if dysfunctional, by invoking pity and others' attention, configuring a social currency of suffering. The search for attention and external validation through pity is central. Suffering can be used as social currency to provoke specific responses, such as sympathy or exemption from responsibility. This refers to the transactional nature of the victim role in interpersonal dynamics. Insecurity or low self-esteem can lead to the victim role, eliciting secondary gains and reinforcing this identity. This creates codependency in relationships, where others can enable the victim role, making liberation difficult. The drama becomes a shared script that prevents the awakening of consciousness and authenticity in relationships. Although the material doesn't detail substances, the logic can be applied to addiction to suffering. The psychological comfort of blaming others prevents change and avoids the discomfort of facing one's own flaws. The escape from responsibility has a hidden cost. Victimhood leads to stagnation and inability to react, preventing personal growth and spiritual awakening. Blaming others brings temporary relief, but results in a loss of agency and personal power. The perceived control from avoiding responsibility comes at the cost of self-mastery and an authentic life. It is a short-term gain with a long-term spiritual and psychological deficit. This perpetuates a cycle of learned helplessness, where the individual depends on external circumstances instead of cultivating internal resilience. This is a direct contradiction to the mission of awakening consciousness and reconnecting with the essential self, a pillar of authentic spirituality. If victimhood is an addiction that imprisons us, who would you be without this role? The identity of the self is a dynamic construct, and fixation on the victim role is one of the most limiting forms. Transpersonal psychology suggests that the self is a construct, and our true nature is an open, empty, and potent territory of creativity. Fixation on the victim's self traps us, preventing flourishing and the awakening of consciousness. The ego clings to a partial perception of reality, seeking external validation, and the victim role is an identity constructed and maintained by it. Questioning this role opens the way to freedom and spiritual awakening. Abandoning this constructed identity is a challenge. It requires self-reflection and the recognition of one's own responsibility, which can be uncomfortable. There is the fear of not being able to cope with life without the gains of the victim role, and the apprehension of breaking with social patterns. Furthermore, the person may fear dealing with repressed anger and guilt, which the victim role helps to avoid. This transition is painful, as it implies the loss of unconscious gains and the confrontation of deep fears. There is a comfort zone in the discomfort of victimization, which is preferable to the challenges of authoring one's own life. This comfort is predictability and the avoidance of existential fears. The fear of taking responsibility leads to attachment to the victim role as a shield, resisting change. True spiritual awakening requires confronting this comfort zone and embracing the uncertainty and responsibility of conscious creation. It is a call to be the author of your own story. Viktor Frankl's logotherapy offers a perspective for overcoming victimhood. Frankl emphasizes that life has unconditional meaning, and human beings can decide their attitude towards circumstances. The spiritual dimension allows for self-transcendence, going beyond oneself in search of purpose. Logotherapy liberates from victimhood by focusing on meaning and personal responsibility, allowing one to transcend pain and build an identity based on values, not on complaint. Liberation is deconstruction and reconstruction. Transpersonal psychology and logotherapy complement each other. One sees the self as a construct and freedom in the open and empty space, and the other seeks unconditional meaning and self-transcendence. Abandoning the victim role is a deconstruction of a false identity and a reconstruction based on deeper spiritual principles. It is a process of death and rebirth for the self, aligned with the transcendence of the ego and reconnection with the essential self for spiritual awakening. On the path of transcendence and the reconstruction of an authentic identity, a subtle trap emerges: distorted self-compassion. When misunderstood, it can lead to personal stagnation, disguised as care. It is fundamental to differentiate healthy self-compassion from self-pity and distorted self-compassion, an important discernment in applied spirituality. Self-pity is excessive rumination on problems, without resolution, and feeling sorry for oneself, keeping the individual trapped in suffering. In contrast, healthy self-compassion is treating oneself with kindness in moments of failure, recognizing human imperfection. It involves having perspective, acting to alleviate suffering, and cultivating motivation and compassion for others. It is a more stable source of personal value, promoting personal development and inner strength. Distorted self-compassion manifests as justifying inaction and maintaining suffering under the pretext of being gentle with oneself, confusing care with complacency, which hinders the awakening of consciousness. Excessive self-indulgence and the fear of self-compassion can lead to stagnation. Mentally strong people avoid self-pity and self-indulgence, taking on responsibilities. Erik Erikson defines stagnation as self-centered and self-indulgent behavior, increasing the risk of psychological problems. Self-criticism and fear of self-compassion oppose healthy self-compassion and are associated with negative outcomes. Self-indulgence disguised as self-compassion is a subtle form of stagnation, avoiding the discomfort of growth. The fear of self-compassion, paradoxically, can lead to stagnation, keeping the individual trapped in self-criticism or victimization. Distorted self-compassion functions as a mechanism for avoiding responsibility. If self-pity is rumination without resolution, and strong people avoid self-pity by taking responsibilities, then distorted self-compassion is a sophisticated psychological defense. It allows the individual to feel that they are being gentle with themselves, while avoiding the discomfort of self-responsibility and confronting their role in suffering. It is a spiritual bypass of personal responsibility. The unwillingness to face discomfort leads to a misinterpretation of self-compassion as self-indulgence, justifying inaction and reinforcing the victim identity. This is a significant challenge on the spiritual path, as it can masquerade as wisdom. Just accept yourself as you are, undermining transformation. It creates a false sense of peace that is stagnation, preventing spiritual awakening. Applied spirituality requires discernment. Confusing genuine care with complacency hinders flourishing and personal responsibility, essential for the awakening of consciousness. If distorted self-compassion holds us back, what about the ego's need to be right? This is one of the most destructive manifestations, a great obstacle to healing and the liberation of the mind. Eckhart Tolle describes the ego as the identification with the voice in the head and emotions. It struggles to survive, criticizing and condemning others to feel superior and right. Complaining and resentment are ego strategies. The quote, "The ego doesn't want you to heal. It wants you to be right," validates this. The need to be right is an ego's struggle for validation, opposing acceptance and, consequently, healing and spiritual awakening. The ego's identification with the personal narrative is central. The ego identifies with me and my story, including resentments. This filters reality. The need to always be right indicates an unbalanced ego, seeking validation and having difficulty dealing with criticism. The personal narrative, especially that of suffering, becomes an ego's fortress. The quest to be right is the defense of this fortress, preventing the flexibility for healing and blocking the awakening of consciousness. There is a truth of the ego and a truth of the self. The ego's truth is rigid, focused on me and my story, and on being right. The self's truth is fluid, present, unconditioned, embracing acceptance and compassion, the core of spiritual awakening. The ego's resistance to healing is resistance to abandoning its truth, narrative, certainty, for a deeper truth. The spiritual journey is about unlearning the ego's need for answers, allowing the wisdom of the present moment. It is a shift to experiential presence, a true awakening of consciousness. Spiritual masters and transpersonal approaches speak of ego transcendence. Non-reaction to the ego in others helps one go beyond the ego in oneself. Forgiveness, in this context, is seeing through the ego. It is a spiritual practice for ego transcendence. By forgiving, the individual identifies from the ego's need to cling to grievances and be right. It is a conscious choice to dissolve the ego's energy, freeing oneself from the past. This redefines forgiveness as self-liberation, aligning with inner silence and lucid action, calming the ego's narrative and promoting spiritual awakening. Transpersonal psychology and logotherapy, inspired by Tolle and Frankl, emphasize ego transcendence for the realization of the self. Concepts like impermanence and ego elimination indicate that healing resides in disidentification with egoic constructs. Universal wisdom points to a path beyond the ego, where the liberation of the conditioned mind and the need to be right are crucial steps for full consciousness and true healing, culminating in the awakening of consciousness. Throughout this analysis, we have explored how the identity based on suffering is an egoic construct, maintained by unconscious secondary gains and the insistent need to be right. Reflect. The suffering self is a subtle and powerful illusion of the ego, a minefield for spiritual awakening. Pain, often, is the foundation where the mind builds an identity. But remember, the ego doesn't want you to heal. It wants you to be right. By clinging to pain, the ego seeks validation and control, transforming suffering into an invisible addiction that hinders personal development and autonomy. To anchor these insights in your life, I invite you to a brief symbolic practice. Gently close your eyes. Imagine yourself as a vase. For a long time, perhaps this vase has been filled with complaints, resentments, and attachments to suffering. Now, visualize yourself emptying this vase, allowing the murky water of pain to drain away, taking with it the need to be right, the addiction of victimhood, and distorted self-compassion. Feel the vase become light, empty, but not hollow. Perceive that this emptiness is not absence, but a fertile space, a womb of the invisible. Now, in this sacred emptiness, plant a seed. This seed is the seed of presence, of your true essence. Feel it pulsating with the promise of a new flourishing. Breathe deeply, inhaling light and acceptance, and exhaling any lingering attachment to pain. Know that, even in the darkness of the earth, the seed finds the strength to sprout. Remember, every pain is a seed buried in the darkness, waiting for silence to bloom. If something within you has calmed or awakened upon hearing these words, allow yourself to continue. Subscribe to the channel and activate notifications to walk with us on this fertile road of silence, discoveries, and reconnection. Leave your experience in the comments. Your sharing is also a seed of healing for other hearts. And to continue expanding this field of presence, we suggest the video in the card. May it be another invitation for your deep transformation and the awakening of a consciousness that flourishes beyond pain. Peace and light.